In today's class, we're going to learn how to pronounce the rest of the consonants in English. Don't go away. Hola, and welcome to Spanish with El Güero. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe so that you don't miss any classes. And while you're at it, why don't you give the video a like? In our previous class, we started to learn about the consonants in Spanish. And we learned that not all of the consonants in Spanish are pronounced the same way they are pronounced in English. In our previous class, we learned how to pronounce correctly the D, the G, the H, the J, the L, and the ñ, that consonant that doesn't exist in English. In today's class, we're going to learn how to pronounce correctly the rest of the consonants that are not pronounced the same in English and Spanish. The Q, the R, the V, the X, the Y, and the Z. So let's start with the Q. The Q in Spanish, just like in English, is always followed by a U. It's always QU. The difference is that in Spanish, when we have the combination QU, the U is silent, and we only pronounce the Q. And of course, the Q is pronounced like the K, such as in words like que, what? Que. It is not que, it is que. The U is silent. Quince, 15. Quince. Quince doesn't exist. It is quince. Aquí. Here. Aquí. Once again, aquí doesn't exist. It is aquí. There are no exceptions to this rule. In Spanish, the combination QU just sounds like a K. The U is silent. Que, quince, aquí. Next, we have the R. The R actually has two sounds in Spanish. The first sound is just like the D in the word ladder in English. Ladder, ladder. That really quick D sound that you make when you pronounce ladder, that is the R sound in Spanish. At least it's the first R sound. So for example, in pero, cara, varios, it's just a very quick sound. Pero, cara, varios. Just pretend that you are pronouncing that quick D sound in English. Pero, cara, varios. The other R sound in Spanish is the hard R sound. This is where you roll your tongue. This is a very famous sound in Spanish. All of us English speakers know this sound. We may not know how to pronounce it, but we know that in Spanish, this sound exists. The sound is rrr, rrr. What you do is you put your tongue in the same position as if you were going to pronounce that soft R sound or that quick D sound in English, but you don't take your tongue out of that position and you just keep on letting the air flow. Rrr, rrr. You need to make sure your tongue is not tense. Put the tip of your tongue on the roof of your mouth just behind your teeth, but make sure your tongue is relaxed. And then keep letting the air flow. Rrr, rrr. We can hear this sound in words such as rápido, or rosa, This is a sound that you may need to practice a lot. It can be difficult for some people. Everybody's different. Some people don't find it very difficult, and others find it very difficult. Rrr, rrr, rápido, rosa. So what is the rule? When is the R soft, as in pero, and when is it hard, as in rápido? Well, basically, the rule is if the R is at the beginning of the word, it is hard. That's why it is hard in rápido and rosa. If it's in the middle of the word, it is soft. That's why it is soft in pero, cara, and varios. If the R is at the end of the word, then it can be soft or hard. It's usually soft if another word comes after it, but if it's the last word in the sentence or the phrase, then it's usually hard. So for example, in words like comer and hablar, the R is at the end of the word. If it's at the end of a sentence, it's usually hard, but it doesn't have to be. Vamos a comer. We're going to eat. Vamos a comer. But if there is another word after it in the sentence, then it's almost always soft. Vamos a comer algo. We're going to eat something. Vamos a comer algo. Algo comes after comer, and so that R turns into a soft R. Vamos a comer algo. So remember, the R is soft when it comes in the middle of a word, and it's hard when it comes at the beginning of a word. If it comes at the end of a word, it's usually hard if it's the last word in the sentence, and it's almost always soft if another word comes after it in the sentence. The next letter that we're going to learn how to pronounce is the V. In Spanish, supposedly, the V is pronounced just like the V in English, but that's not really how it's pronounced. In Spanish-speaking countries, the great majority of native Spanish speakers pronounce the V just like the B. In Spanish, for most people, there is no difference in sound between the B and the V. The V sound actually is very difficult for most native Spanish speakers to pronounce because they're not used to it. They just don't use it. So for example, in words like vaca, cow, the great majority of Spanish speakers do not say vaca. They say vaca. Joven, young, joven. It is not joven, it is joven, like a B. Volver, return, volver. Here we have two V's, and we pronounce both of them like a B. It is not volver, it is volver. Vaca, joven, volver. The next letter we're going to talk about is the X. The X is pronounced the same in English and Spanish, as in conexión and examen. It's the same in English and Spanish. Conexión, examen. But there is a caveat. There are some words in Spanish in which the X is pronounced like an H in English. These tend to be place names such as Mexico and Texas. Mexico in Spanish is not pronounced Mexico, it's pronounced Mexico, even though it's spelt with an X. Mexico. The same with Texas, Texas, or Oaxaca. Especially in Mexico, there are many place names that are spelled with an X, but is pronounced like an H in English. But that's not all. There are a few words in Spanish that start with an X, and in those cases, the X is pronounced like an S, such as in xilófono, xilófono, xylophone, xilófono. In English, when an X comes at the beginning of a word, it's pronounced like a Z. In Spanish, it's pronounced like an S, xilófono. So in the great majority of words that have an X in Spanish, it's pronounced just like the X in English. Conexión, examen. But there are a lot of place names, especially in Mexico, where the X is pronounced like an H in English. Mexico, Texas. And when the X comes at the beginning of a word, there aren't very many of those, but when it does, it's pronounced like an S. Xilófono. The next letter that is not pronounced exactly the same in English and Spanish is the Y. The Y in Spanish is very similar to the Y in English, but in most places, it's pronounced like a very faint J sound. So the word yo, I, is usually not pronounced yo, but yo. It is not a hard J sound, very pronounced, like in the name Joe. No, it's a very light J sound, yo. Or in playa. It's not playa, it's playa, ya. It's a very faint J sound, playa. Hoyo. It is not oyo. It is oyo. A very slight J sound. Oyo. So the exception to this is in Argentina and Uruguay. People from Argentina and Uruguay pronounce the Y like an SH in English. And so they say sho, plasha, and osho. Those are the only two countries in which the Y is pronounced like that. There are other places in which the Y is pronounced pretty much the same as it's pronounced in English, but in most places, the Y has that very light J sound. Yo, playa, oyo. Now, the exception is when the Y comes at the end of a word. When the Y comes at the end of a word, well, then it's just pronounced like the Y in English at the end of a word. E, such as in muy, muy, rey, rey, hoy, hoy. In these words, the Y is pronounced E, muy, rey, hoy. And the last consonant we're going to talk about today is the Z, the very last consonant in the alphabet. This letter is also not pronounced the same in English and Spanish. Actually, the Z sound does not exist in Spanish. This is where a lot of English speakers make mistakes. They pronounce that Z sound when it doesn't even exist in Spanish, and then their Spanish sounds terrible. So then how do we pronounce the Z in Spanish? Well, in the great majority of the Spanish-speaking world, the Z is pronounced exactly like the S. So for example, in words like zona, zona, zone, zona, it is not zona. That doesn't exist. Zona, 10, 10, 10. It is not diez. Diez doesn't exist. It is 10. Realizar, realizar, realize, realizar. It is not realizar. Realizar doesn't exist. It is realizar. Now, there is a caveat to that as well. In Spain, the Z is pronounced like a TH in English. And so it would be zona, 10, and realizar. That's how they pronounce it in Spain. But in Latin America, it's just pronounced like an S. Zona, 10, realizar. So when you speak Spanish, if you find yourself pronouncing the Z sound, then you are pronouncing whatever you're pronouncing wrong, because that sound doesn't exist in Spanish. So remember, in Spanish, the Q always comes with a U, just like in English, but the U is silent. Que, 15, aquí. The R has two sounds. The soft sound, which is like the fast D sound in English, pero, cara, varios, and the hard rolled sound, rápido, rosa. The V in Spanish is pronounced just like the B, vaca, joven, volver. The X in Spanish is pronounced just like the X in English, conexión, examen. But there are a lot of place names, especially in Mexico, in which the X is pronounced like an H in English, Mexico, Texas. And in the few words in which the X comes at the beginning of the word, it's pronounced like an S, xilófono. In the majority of the Spanish-speaking world, the Y is pronounced like a light J sound in English, yo, playa, except when it comes at the end of a word, in which case it's pronounced E, just like the Y in English, muy, rey. And the Z in the majority of the Spanish-speaking world is pronounced just like the S. The Z sound doesn't exist. Zona, 10, realizar. And with that, including the last class and this class, now you know how to pronounce all of the consonants in Spanish. And so now it's time to practice. Just like I told you in the last class, I want you to find words that have all of these letters, listen to them, and then repeat them. You can look them up in an online dictionary, click on the little speaker symbol, and listen to them, and then repeat them. Record yourself repeating them, listen to the correct pronunciation, compare it to your pronunciation, and then repeat the process until you can pronounce these sounds correctly. Some will be easier for you than others. Practice the ones that are a problem for you. And that's our class for today. Leave a comment about which of these sounds is the most difficult for you. I hope this class was fun and useful for you. If you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, well, subscribe so that you don't miss any classes. See you next time.